I was confronted at gunpoint, first time since I had been in combat. This certain day, the gym had electrical fire, so it closed down. I went home early, and unbeknownst to me, someone had been canvassing my whereabouts for some period of time, kind of tracking when I would leave the house, and decided to rob it that morning. And so I walked in on an active burglary, and unfortunately, the perpetrator had access to my firearm, which was in the bedroom, and so I was confronted at gunpoint, first time since I had been in combat.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. How we doing, Tony?
Morning, Bear.
Feeling good?
Feeling good. We got a little bit of sun.
Got the flip-flops on. I'm wearing the tiger stripe shorts. Hopefully I'm not in frame for that. But really excited for today's guest. I'm going to read his intro. We have John Miles. He is a former Navy officer, a Fortune 50 executive, multi-industry CEO. Throughout his career, he faced personal challenges, including combat-related injuries, traumatic brain injuries, and a persistent sense of invisibility. In 2017, a serious health scare prompted him to reevaluate his path and priorities. And that experience led him to create Passion Struck, which is a platform focused on helping others find meaning and purpose in their lives. Obviously, that's a big topic we hit on this podcast. Through his book, podcast, and public speaking, John encourages people to feel seen, valued, and motivated to make a positive impact in their own lives and communities. So, John, without further ado, welcome to the podcast.
No. Yeah, such an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, John, I think just to dive in, obviously you had a very successful career, naval officer, and then obviously a successful executive, Fortune 50 company, the whole gamut. So, externally, people viewed you as someone really having it together and highly accomplished. And as I understand it, back in 2017, something happened in your life that led you down a new path. So could you speak to that a little bit and what ultimately led you to the path you're on now?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I would say I felt the calling to go down this path as early as 2006, 2007. When I was kind of given this subliminal mission that I was supposed to help. The words that were given to me were the lonely, the broken, the beaten, the battered, the helpless of the world. But, at the time, I'm a senior executive at Lowe's, have no idea how to disconnect from what I was doing professionally to even think about who those people were, or more importantly, what was it that I was supposed to do to help them? And so I went down this journey of kind of knowing that I was having this calling, but avoiding it because it was uncomfortable to leave the life that I was living. And this persisted for some time, and the signs kept getting louder and louder. And when I talk about signs, I mean like biblical signs, like floods and scorpions falling from the ceilings and termite infestations and things like that. But what finally got me to move were two really traumatic events that happened within a week of each other. The first was I left the house like I did at the time every morning, took my daughter to school, and then went to the gym. This certain day, the gym had an electrical fire, so it closed down. I went home early, and unbeknownst to me, someone had been canvassing my whereabouts for some period of time, kind of tracking when I would leave the house, and decided to rob it that morning. And so I walked in on an active burglary, and unfortunately, the perpetrator had access to my firearm, which was in the bedroom. And so I was confronted at gunpoint, first time since I had been in combat, by someone pointing a gun at me, and luckily was able to evade them, live for another day. And 4 days later, I awoke to the news that one of my closest friends had committed suicide. So those two events kind of gave me that last wake-up call that I needed, that what am I doing here? Putting off what I've been called to do. And it really sent me down this mission of taking 2 years of self-discovery, which ended up culminating in the book that I wrote and caused me to create the Passion Struck movement, which I'm now leading.
John, over that 2 years that you took after kind of those two final crises struck, walk us through kind of the seasons within that 2 years. Did you feel, of course, I'm sure you were dealing with some grief, some fear regarding the fact that you were just held at gunpoint, but how did that 2 years evolve, and were there seasons to it as far as the emotions that bubbled up when you finally decided to take that leap?
Yeah. So one of the things I say, and I write about in the book, is the first thing you have to do is become what I call a mission angler. So you really have to go on this search of finding what is it that you're called to do? What is the problem that you're called to solve? And so that was part of this journey I was going down, because it's one thing to be given a list of symptoms or people you're supposed to help, but it's a much bigger thing to kind of find the one word problem of what is causing these people to suffer. So that was part of it, but it was also for me dealing with a variety of conditions that I myself was suffering from, because I think at the end of the day, we're best positioned to serve the person that we once were. So for me, I think anyone who's starting on a new journey, it's one thing to know the problem you're called to solve. It's another to get through the stuck points that are keeping you from actually doing it. So I went through a profound period of self-awareness during those 2 years, where I realized that the thing that was keeping me from doing all of this was pent-up trauma that I had kept suppressed ever since I was in the military and beyond. And I'm not sure about you guys being athletes and veterans, but when I was in, especially serving the NSA and being in special operations, the one thing that I was taught to do was to kind of suppress all of that and not to make it known for fear of losing your security clearance. So I had held on to that stuff for a long time. So for me to move on from it, I really invested in all kinds of therapy that I'd been avoiding for years. So that included cognitive processing therapy. That's kind of where I started, but I went into prolonged exposure therapy, went into EMDR and some other areas as well, just trying to get at the heart of what was keeping me stuck. And that journey was emotionally painful. But on the other side, I didn't have those things that were holding me back anymore. And it really opened up for me this whole other side that I had been suppressing for so long. And it also gave me the confidence to move forward.
And John, was it hard? Because I would imagine, given your track record, you're probably a highly motivated type A kind of guy. So to have the self-awareness to say, hey, I got to take a knee and sort things out. Was that difficult? Because I imagine, like myself, if I try to take, a year hiatus, I think I'd last a week and I'd be like, all right, what's the next hustle I can get involved in? You know what I mean? I'd start looking for properties I'm going to buy and whatever. But how were you able to, I guess, take that knee and trust that, okay, this is what needs to be done to kind of sort some things out and get a new way ahead?
Well, I just think sometimes I think the thing that we're missing the most in life is awareness. We are all stuck in this fast-paced world that we live in, and we end up conforming, the way I put it, to being a pinball in the game of pinball, meaning we end up bouncing off all the distractions that life throws at us, and we end up letting those distractions control us instead of us taking a step back, quieting everything, and learning how to play the game instead of the game playing us. And so that's exactly what I ended up doing. And in my case, I had been on this track for so long that I think the longer that you're conditioned to do something, the longer it takes you to wake up on the other side. So for me, it really was a journey of self-awakening. And I don't think in any shape or form I'd be here now if I hadn't done it. But it was very uncomfortable at first. And so I immersed myself into yoga practice and meditation and long walks and just tons of periods of self-introspection of, what was working well in my life, but more importantly, what were the ugly sides that I really didn't want to confront, but I forced myself to confront.
And John, what were some of I think what you said there is so important, is that kind of the pinball analogy is that if you don't get in tune with kind of the nature of, let's call it the monkey minded, how much of the stories you're telling yourself and the patterns that you think on a day-to-day basis are actually kind of a projection of both the outside world, your childhood, just all of this stuff that kind of piles up, and you don't realize it's kind of the software that's running, or the algorithm that's running in the back of your head that's leading to the decisions you're making. In your personal journey, what were some of the stories you recognized? I know you said repression, but like, what were some of the underlying stories you recognized and then were able to get some separation from, as to what could have been contributing to you feeling kind of invisible even through your corporate and military career?
Yeah, well, for me, it really all started at a very young age when I was somewhere between 5 and 6 years old. I was playing with some neighbor kids. We were just playing a simple game of tag, and things started to get rowdy, as they typically do when you're at that age. And we got more and more physical, and I happened to be running from my next door neighbor when he pushed me from behind and it kind of propelled me in the air to crash through our basement window. And I awoke coming out of a coma to having tubes in my head and stitches over the top of my head, and realizing I had a traumatic brain injury. But for me, the invisibility just got worse from there, because it caused me to have vision issues, leading to having to wear a patch on one of my eyes for about 3 years, which you can imagine how that went when you're 5, 6 years old. I suddenly developed a stutter and a severe speech impediment. I had cognitive issues, chronic migraines, learning difficulties. And so the only thing I wanted to do was try to curl up into a ball at that age and not have people talk to me, not recognize, because I was so self-conscious of everything that was going on with me. And I think that invisibility, I eventually met a speech therapist who kind of helped me not only work on getting through my speech impediment, but helped me see my true self underneath this. But it also made me think that I always had to do things better than everyone else to prove my worth. And I think that is what carried then forward. Certainly going through the Naval Academy, there's a ton of, I think bonds that you make there, but there's also a ton of competition that ends up going on, because you're competing at the end of the day for class rank and for other things, which determine what you get to select coming out of there. So I think this competition and type A side of me just started to build up. And then when I got out of the military and into the civilian sector, I just kept striving to prove myself. And the way I describe it is that I was kind of wearing a mask where I was suppressing who I was internally and showing a different version of myself to the world. Quite frankly, because I wasn't comfortable with the person in my own skin. And because I was hiding that version of me, that inner person really felt invisible, because I wasn't showing truly who I was, because I didn't think I was going to be accepted.
I mean, that's so awesome. We talk about this a lot, and, I think it came out a ton when I did a plant medicine experience, and Tony has done the same way more than I have. But for you to be able to kind of pinpoint the root of all of that, to me, shows how much reflection you've done on that and how deep you've dove into, dissecting all of those thoughts. And that probably took a lot of stillness and meditation and journaling. And so I commend you, because that makes total sense. And I can relate to a lot of that on my own journey of trying to be this, type A, you always got to be achieving something to put up this front of success or whatever. So very cool to hear that. I mean, but it's also a wild how long you were able to carry that success before you had that realization. I mean, you were a successful executive for how long? I think at least a decade, right? You mentioned Lowe's was 06. And then in 2017, I think is when you kind of, did that, that pivot. But it's just awesome to hear that journey and that realization of what was really underneath all that. And I think a lot of us carry a version of that mask, right? And I think a lot of people never actually take it off. So props to you for being able to do that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was, in addition to Lowe's, I was the first chief information security officer for a company called Lend-Lease, $15 billion company based in Australia, and their head of enterprise risk, reporting directly to the board, then Lowe's, then CIO at Dell, then chief operating officer and head of technology at a tech company. So I was really performing at a high level on the outside while I was suffering immensely on the inside during that entire period.
And John, I'm curious, like at that level, like what is the lifestyle when you're in the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company? Because kind of from where I'm from, that just kind of seems a little untouchable. Like what is the expectation? What was your lifestyle like? Are you working a ton? Obviously, there's tons of professional pressure to perform, right? You have the earnings call coming up. You get, everyone's got to look good. So I guess walk us through what that, decade plus looked like as far as just the professional pressure and expectations and how you navigated that.
Yeah, well, Lend-Lease and Dell were different than Lowe's because both of them are very global companies. In fact, at both of those companies, I would say 75% of my staff was not based in the U.S., so they required a tremendous amount of travel. Lowe's is 90% U.S. based outside of the factories that they have in China. And when I was there, we opened stores in Canada and Mexico, but those were, really a distraction compared to the 1,800 plus stores and the distribution centers. So Lowe's, being a retail environment, you worked the hours that you worked in retail. So my two bosses were the CIO and the chief operating officer, who happened to be brothers. They both liked to get in the office between 5:30 and 6 a.m. in the morning. And the chief operating officer sometimes wouldn't leave till commonly 7:30 at night. So you start following a pattern that they're working. So lots of 11, 12-hour days. Plus, for a long period of time, I was running operations for them. So anytime we had any issue, regardless of the weekend or night, I was on phone calls or video conferences dealing with hurricanes, outages, those types of things. So probably working 60 to 80 hour weeks typically. And then Dell was even more intensive than that because I was traveling 2 weeks out of the month out of the country. And so on not only on a different time zone, but you're working the time zone you're in, but then you're also working the other time zones because I had staff in South America, North America, Europe, Asia, etc. So then I would get back from those trips, and for the next 2 weeks, you'd be playing catch up back in Round Rock and then working the other shifts. So I was easily working 80 to 100 hour weeks. And what I really learned throughout all that experience, looking back, is that I was doing a fantastic job of making money for companies and the board and et cetera, but I really wasn't focused on making my own dreams a reality. And what I was facing pays a huge toll after a while because it starts impacting your relationships, it starts impacting your physical and mental health, and obviously your emotional health. So I can see why so many people who are in those environments and end up getting burned out.
John, do you think now with 9 years of kind of a different trajectory to your life, if you were to take all your learnings and kind of the awareness, both self-awareness and then just macro awareness that you have now, and put yourself back into the seat at Lowe's or at Dell, how would your leadership style change? And also, do you think you could even last a month or 2 months there with kind of the new awareness you have?
Well, I would definitely do it differently. And I think I would have worked a lot smarter than I was doing. I think what ended up happening to me is I got consumed by the calendar. Meaning the biggest thing that I found in those big environments is you are just, as a senior executive, you're consumed by meetings. And it was very difficult to break out of those meetings because at Dell, for instance, I was sitting on the staff of the 5 presidents. So not only was I having to attend their staff meetings, but I had to meet with then their direct reports and the CFO and, of course, Michael and the executive steering committees and the board meetings. So I would have found a different way that I would have put much more strict boundaries in place protecting my time, and would have only taken the most absolutely critical meetings, because anything that you weren't getting done has to get done outside of work. And that was causing a significant drain. So that would be one side of it. But I'd say another huge side of it is I just found with a lot of those companies, and I think a lot of companies now, everything is driven by shareholder value. So what that amounts to is you're either looking at top line growth or bottom line cuts. And so oftentimes what that amounts to is the most critical entity in any of these companies is the people that are driving the companies and the most creative assets that you have. Yet I think so many companies today treat those very people as commodities. And so I would have always said that my leadership style was a servant leader, because that's what I had learned in the military. But I don't think that's the leadership style that's needed in the military anymore. And I don't think it's the type of leadership style that's needed in corporations anymore. And I advocate for something that I call the gardener leader now, because I think just as a gardener gardens their crops, meaning they have to be eyes on in planting the crops, making sure that they're cultivating them. But there's an inherent portion of this where you also need to be hands off, and you need to trust your people, trust the plants, the conditions that they're going to cultivate and grow. And the way I liken this to is if you have a software developer and you're micromanaging everything that they're doing, their output is going to be 100% conditioned by the input that you're giving them, as opposed to giving them a goal that they need to hit with some motivation and constant reinforcement, but allowing them to be creative and to come to their own design conclusions on how to best approach the problem they need to solve. That's, to me, what a gardener does, and why it's different than more of the servant leadership style that I think many people have become accustomed to.
Yeah, I like the gardener analogy, because I think there's and it's kind of exactly what you're saying is there's such a dance that's taking place in leadership, meaning at times pressure is needed, at times there's grace, at times there's that watering, at times there's less water, and kind of let them do their own thing. So yeah, I like that analogy, because it gives room for the kind of the compilation of different variables that go into being a strong leader.
Yeah, and I actually came up with the idea from interviewing General Stan McChrystal and then Keith Crotch. I think more people know who Stan is, but Keith is the former CEO and chairman of DocuSign, and he was the Assistant Secretary of State. But it's a leadership style that they both used, as well as Alan Mulally also used that style when he turned around Ford and the other companies that he was with as well. So it really, once you start looking at it really is, I think, a better leadership model for the world we're faced with today.
You have over 600 episodes recorded now as a podcast host. How has that journey been for you from both the kind of the awareness side, which we've touched on several times, but then also just on your ability to connect with individuals? What are the big kind of pillars that have come out of recording over 600 episodes as a host?
Man, I mean, it's hard to believe we've done that many episodes. It has been really one of the most rewarding experiences of my life to get exposed to so many voices and so much science and different aspects of leadership and hearing different strategies for personal growth. So the thing I appreciated about the most is that it's a constant learning experience for me. And it's really deepened not only my self-awareness, but my awareness of how to help others, because I never wanted to have one of these podcasts where I was just pontificating the latest self-development theories of the day. I always wanted to have a show that was really rooted in science. So everything that I was talking about from a personal level was rooted in science, but I was also bringing in the experts who are actually doing the research to show that these tactics and theories actually work and help in either personal behavior change or help leaders drive organizational shifts and cultural shifts. So that has been really profound. And what's interesting to me is, today I had Tom Shar on the show, who's an Olympic silver medalist, probably one of the greatest skateboarders of all time. But you can learn just as much from his journey as you can from a person I had on earlier in the week, Rosalind Chow, who shows the importance of how it's not necessarily the mentor relationships in life that impact us as much as it is the sponsorship types of relationships and those sponsors who really are advocating on our behalf. So I just find that there's such a diverse aspect to the guests that I bring on that I'm just constantly learning and seeing things from a different perspective all the time.
And what if you had to name, and you can name a couple, but if there was one kind of big theme over the 600 episodes that you feel like you've personally shifted in, meaning like this was a noticeable change where maybe you thought something at episode 1 or 10 or even 100 that now at episode 600 you realize your perspective or grasp of is very differently, and that could be business, self-development, spiritual. Is there anything that stands out to you as something you've really evolved or shifted your perspective on over your journey as a podcast host?
Yeah, the show is really about the art and science of human flourishing. But what I've learned it all comes down to is how you align what Angela Duckworth would call passion and perseverance, or grit, with intentionality, something behavioral scientists would call self-control. So that intentionality is extremely important because it's what guides you either to make choices, because that's what it all comes down to, that are creating habit loops that are either taking you closer to where you want to go or farther away from it. So one of the most profound realizations for me is I was interviewing Michelle Seeger, who's a behavioral scientist from the University of Michigan 4+ years ago. And we were talking about this concept of micro choices, that it's not the large choices that you make that have the biggest influence on your life. It's the thousands of micro choices that happen over a week that end up determining where your life goes. And so this really gets into everything that the show explores, is how do you start conditioning yourself to start making those choices so that they're accumulating in the direction that you want to take your life, as opposed to the opposite direction, because that's what it comes down to, whether you want to change your eating habits, your physical routine of working out, the relationships that you encounter and wanting to better them or allow them to stay that they are, or not do anything about it at all, or your mental health or whatever. It all comes down to how do you learn to make better choices that align your values with your ambitions and your long-term aspirations?
It's a lifelong worth of work there, as far as I call it, like confronting your contradictions, is when you really, really take a magnifying glass to your day, what you eat, what you watch, how you talk, how you interact, how you relate to the loved ones. And you realize how many contradictions there are, not only between who you think you are, meaning your self-identified version, but then also how you would be assessed from the outside. As you're saying, the more you can close the gap on those micro things, those tiny little things that are all piling up day to day, and truly then be able to look in the mirror and say, hey, who I say I am is actually what I'm embodied, meaning my decisions, the foods I eat, the liquids I put in my body, the digital media I consume. That alignment starts to change the trajectory of your life in a way that, like you said, it's not these huge decisions. Now, every once in a while, I think seasonally, there will be some big decisions mixed in there, but it's that congruency between who you think or who you want to be too. It's not only who you think you are now, it's who you want to be in the future. And then how those little micro moments are constantly either taking you closer to that or further away.
I mean, it's absolutely the case. And one of my mentors is Marshall Goldsmith, and he not only wrote the book people know him for, which is What Got You Here Isn't Going to Get You to Where You Want to Go, but the book that I almost think is better is The Earned Life. And at the core of The Earned Life, him studying this over, I think he's in his 70s now, his 70 years, he talks about what I just reinforced, that you need to get alignment between your value system, your short-term ambitions, and your long-term aspirations. And if you are able to get those things in alignment, which comes with intentionality, then you will create that earned life. But when you don't, what ends up happening is there's a theory called self-discrepancy theory, where you have your actual self, who you're living today, and then you have who you should be or who you could be. If those things aren't aligned, what ends up happening is you become who you should be. That's exactly what happened to me. I became who I thought I should be, kind of what was the expectations that I was conditioned with my parents, the military, kind of society, of what I thought I should become instead of what I could become. And that gap is what I think Henry David Thoreau was referring to when he says the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, because they're stuck in the gap between what they know they could be and what they have become. And it's interesting because there's this psychologist named Tom Gilovich out of Cornell, who has researched this for a very long time, interviewed thousands of people nearing death, and 76% of them all report that their biggest regret in life is not pursuing their ideal self, which is really that lens of who they could have been had they been more intentional with their life. And that's why this is so important. It also goes back to all the work that Bronnie Ware has written about in The 5 Regrets of the Dying, where the number one regret that she saw in palatal care was the same exact regret. So that's what Passion Struck is really about, is awaken yourself to this now, regardless of what age you are, so you start living the Passion Struck life that's going to lead you down the path of what you could become.
I think for me, John, and, want you to weigh in on this, but it seems like a lot of people create this mental barrier that that maybe it's a successful outcome or whatever they're striving for is just not attainable. They see people that have achieved it and they say, oh, they're on another level. It's almost like a defeatist mentality when they don't realize that, like you said, those micro decisions day after day stack up into big wins. And for me, what I try to do is, and I'm this is a work in progress, of course, but in my daily decisions, realize, okay, did this contribute to the end state I'm striving to achieve, or did it detract from it? Right? If it's a physical fitness goal, obviously that's an easy one. If I'm eating an ice cream bar with my daughter before I go to bed, that it would be a negative, right? But if I'm dialed in for a few days, each micro decision, makes me a little bit more fit. Same thing with getting to the gym. And that's an easy one because it's very black and white. But when we get into, more of the purpose and finding meaning, I from my, perspective, I think a lot of people, and I would say most, have this mental barrier of not being able to initiate action because they've told themselves it's too hard. Oh, I can't achieve financial stability or financial success because, that's like, all those rich people, like they're just, and it's like, no, pick up a damn finance book, learn about real estate, learn about compound interest. Like, it's free. Google it. Instead of scrolling Instagram, Google something about, and it's so attainable. And to me, the bar is so low on, like, just to be in the median 50% takes like minimal effort. You want to be in the 75th percentile, put in a little bit of effort. You want to be in the 90th percentile, put in a decent amount of effort. It's not that hard because I feel like there's so much distraction in our society that the bar is now so low. And I just wish people could realize, like, all these people they put on a pedestal aren't doing anything that earth shattering. It's micro decisions day after day, stacking up little wins into big wins. And it's from self-initiative. That guy who became a real estate mogul never at one point knew nothing about real estate. He sought out professional development and he figured it out. Right. But there was a point he didn't know about, all these things. So I wonder how I guess your reaction to that. And if you run into that with a lot of what you kind of teach, getting people over that barrier of that defeatist, that'll never be me kind of mentality.
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that separates humans from the rest of animal life on this planet is the fact that we are the perfect learning machine. And I think it's one of those things that's free to us. And so many of us don't use that gift that we've been given, to your point. Meaning, if you want to be a better public speaker, that just doesn't happen overnight. It takes learning and it takes effort. Meaning, when I get ready to go back on the speaker circuit, I go back and start doing things that make me feel incredibly exposed and vulnerable. I go back and I start doing long and short form improv, and I start getting more active in Toastmasters because I know through that purposeful practice of putting myself out there, I'm going to screw up a whole bunch. But I'd rather do it in those environments where there's a protective lens around me so that when I'm on the stage and I need to perform, I've conditioned myself to do it. Now, if I just take that scenario even further, if you really want to learn how to do it, you start studying what the great speakers like Ed Mylett, Mel Robbins, Tony Robbins, like what do they do? And what are the commonalities that you see across all of them, and how they're scripting, the energy they're bringing forward, how they prepare, how they utilize their messages, and you start learning from them how to do it, but do it in your own style. So I think what you're saying is exactly what it comes down to is whatever it is you want to pursue, you have the ability, but it's going to take effort. Meaning, when I asked Tom Shar, he was the first person ever to do a 1080 maneuver in skateboarding. He did it when he was 12 years old. Professionals at that time said it was an impossible feat. And I asked him, how many times did you practice that before you were able to perform it? He goes, at least 1,000 times. I fell on my ass before I got it right. And I think that's what people don't see is they see the Steph Currys, but they don't see the work that they're doing in the unseen hours. They don't see how many hours Steph Curry is dribbling with his non-dominant hand to make it so it's equal to his dominant. They don't see how many three-pointers he's taking. It's the same thing with Michael Jordan. They don't see the fact that he was there hours before his teammates, showing up and doing the work outside of what was expected of him to be the best. And that's what it takes for anyone, regardless if you want to learn real estate, you want to become a podcaster, you want to become an author. You don't just write a book overnight. For me, it started with, I had to learn my voice before I could write a book. And I had to learn how to put words in an organized way on paper. And the way you do that is by researching and by doing. So that's how you have to do anything in life.
Well, I think something that relates to what Bear said, but then also relates to in 2017, what those first 2 years look like for you is, I think step one has to be cleaning up the stories you tell yourself. Because in Bear's example of like, if you have a bunch of stories, because there's a comfort in those stories, meaning like if you grew up in a really tumultuous like household and you've convinced yourself that like, I'm never going to be successful, action can help change that, meaning like making different decisions can certainly help changing that, but getting in there and kind of changing that story to begin with, both through a mix of kind of like it sounds like what John did of like discovering why is that story there in the first place, but then also taking action against it can help negate it. Because you see so many people, it's like that are stuck, but it actually even building a little bit of momentum with the action, eventually that story's still running in the background. So they get 8 months in or a year in or even 2 years in, and all of a sudden they're reverting right back to the same old habits. It's like, so yeah, just a way, at least from my perspective, of kind of attacking it on both ends of like, well, where did this originate? And if in there too, from my experience, you don't need to get addicted to trying to unravel everything, because you can actually get like caught up in that where you're trying to unravel too much instead of just taking action forward. But I think nipping it in the butt at both ends, meaning taking action to align with your future self while also trying to discover where that stemmed from in the first place, can provide even kind of exponential growth in the direction you're looking to achieve. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you really want to see what's governing your life, you go back to the Eisenhower quadrants, where you start looking at what's occupying your time, and where you're spending your money, because that really dictates where you're putting the focus in your life. And at that point in time, I was doing a whole bunch of activities that weren't taking me anywhere close to where I wanted to go. But I think what ends up happening is we get comfortable doing those activities, and it gets really uncomfortable auditing them. And so you have to get yourself to a point where, as you were saying, you allow yourself to get rid of that story that you've always been telling yourself, because that's the only way you can rewrite it and start creating a new story. And I just look back and I found that when I was in my earlier 30s and was really performing at an extremely high level, I realized I could get back to that point, but it required me to ditch a lot of the behaviors that I had allowed into my life at that time, that I had to get rid of. And it's something that I write about in the book. I call it a mosquito audit. And these are the activities that you do, and they're also the people that you allow into your inner circle, that you have to identify who's holding you back, what's holding you back, and then you have to put boundaries in place to protect your new identity from reverting to your old ways.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think for a lot of people, I think there ends up being a little bit of paralysis by analysis of not knowing where to start, what to, if it's a career decision, I just don't know. So you end up just making no decision. And, my thought process is, hey, pick a direction of travel. It's probably going to change anyway, but at least get moving in a direction. And I think also focusing on like, all right, what can you do to improve your fighting position in achieving that outcome? So let's just create an example. You're a single mom with a high school degree. And you got a couple kids running around and you're working maybe a low paying job and it's super stressful and you're barely making ends meet. That's a tough hand, right? All right, what can we do to improve our fighting position? All right, maybe we take some night classes. We get that bachelor's degree. Maybe it takes you 5 years, but you're starting, okay? You get that bachelor's degree. Now you're eligible for a more high paying job. Okay, hey, what about we go get that master's now, all online, or you're doing night classes, whatever it is, right? Little by little, you're improving your fighting position and you're increasing the likelihood that you have a better outcome, right? And then maybe you land that good job and then you crush it. And now before you know it, you're a director, and 10 years later, you're unrecognizable to the person you were 10 years ago, but it's because you made a decision to pick a direction of travel and improve your position. And I just see people getting stuck in the same day to day because they feel defeated. Oh, like they throw their hands up and, and there are some legit tough hands, right? You're going to have to get in the trenches for a while. Maybe if you're a guy, you're mowing lawns at night. You know what I mean? Like out from your day job. Shit, I had a Yale degree and I was mowing lawns at night, and I worked for a company that was selling 3 billion cans of energy drinks a year. Right. I thought at that time, being 22 years old, a Yale degree didn't matter, and I was going to, stay scrappy and keep that blue collar mentality. So I wish more people could be empowered to just know that they can do it, and that it's not this unattainable task. And it starts with that first decision to pick a direction of travel and go. I think people like you that are, putting out content that can inspire and motivate. Unfortunately, one of the benefits of social media and YouTube and all these things, while there's a ton of distractions in podcasts, but there's also some great free content out there that is so good that if people can, similar to what you said, kind of who's in your inner circle, what content are you consuming? You know what I mean? What does your news feed look like on Instagram? Is it a bunch of dumb stuff, or is it, motivational and things that can add to it? So at least when you're scrolling, drinking your morning coffee, you're getting served the right stuff that is improving and not just a complete dopamine hit. So I'll get off my soapbox on that one, but kind of just from my optic, that's what I see a lot.
Well, I think what you just said is really important. I mean, we don't always know the end point when we start, but starting at least gets you momentum going, and momentum will then give you the opportunity to see, even if the first steps aren't going in the right direction, where you need to pivot. Meaning, I just spoke to this gentleman who's building a brand new podcasting technology platform, which is going to be the first out there that's video first. And I asked him, because I was so impressed with how far the technology had gotten, how long have you been doing this? He said, well, I've been doing it for a year, but I ended up having to throw out the first 5 months because at the end of the day, we realized it was just crap. And so we took those learnings. And you think about that, is that 5 months of wasted time? No, it's 5 months of learning. And that accelerated them starting from scratch and redesigning it in a much better way that over time is going to speed up their entire journey to the success that they want to get. And I think our life is so much like that. Oftentimes we start down a certain track and then realize through the experimentation that we're doing that we end up pivoting and doing something else. And that's kind of exactly what happened to me. I started down the track where I started a company initially that was doing, the fractional CXO type of work, only to find that there were aspects of the entrepreneurial journey I liked, but I didn't like the business model that I was in. But it gave me the confidence to stretch even further and to do Passion Struck and start the podcast and other things. So I don't consider any of that time that I worked on Avesto to be a waste, but I saw it as a gateway to help me gain the confidence to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's the idea that even if it's the wrong direction of travel initially, it's going to lead to learnings that will ultimately point you in the right direction. And that's true being an entrepreneur. Your first or second or third gig none of those might not pan out, but you're going to learn so much from those mistakes that eventually you're going to find that business model that works and produces for your family and so forth. So I love that. And I just wish people could kind of know that, hey, you don't have to get it right the first time. We see that a lot with transitioning veterans. There's one that I speak to called the Honor Foundation a few times a year. What I try to tell every time I speak there is, hey guys, don't worry about picking this first job perfect. It's probably not going to be what you do 10 years from now anyway. So lower the bar of that pressure. A lot of transitioning vets, they think, okay, I have to get this right. And it's like, even if this is the worst job ever, it's going to validate, okay, I don't want to be in finance, or I don't want to be with this software company. So there's just as much value from that as, picking the perfect job. And hopefully that's encouraging for people to know that don't worry, we're all figuring it out. And if you don't have clarity, pick a direction to travel. And even if it's the complete wrong direction and you got to do a reciprocal bearing on that, it's okay. Because at least you're not going due south, you're going due north now. Okay. And it's all good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a 26-year-old, and I always tell him, because he does the same thing I did when I was his age. He compares himself to his high school friends and college friends and where they're at now. And I said, you can't get into the comparison trap, because at any time your life can explode. You just have to figure out for yourself what it is that deeply inspires you to wake up in the morning and be excited about your life. And once you find that thing, success is going to come your way. But he often looks at it that, I got this business degree. I've ended up going down this path that I don't like. This is what I really want to do. And I'm like, life is so much longer than we think it is. And I just find, if you would have told me I would be doing what I'm doing now and having the success that I'm having doing it now, when I was in my 20s, I would have told you you were crazy. So I think we always have time in our life left to reinvent ourselves, to do the thing that we're feeling called to do. And it always bothers me when I talk to people who are, in their late 40s, 50s, even 60s, who say, I'm too old to do something new. And I always tell them that there's always the chance to change, always the chance to change directions and to do what fulfills you before it becomes too late.
Absolutely. Well, it's a good way to end. Tony, anything else?
No, I was just going to thank you, John, so much for coming on. And I know we talked about the podcast several times, but I want to give you a chance. Please plug any books you have, the podcast, and any other events or anything you have coming up in the near future.
Yeah. So we actually have a ton of stuff coming on, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Passion Struck, as you said, is now 600 episodes in, and we recently launched a whole new community platform for it called the Ignition Room, because what I find coming off the podcast is that we give out a ton of free information, a ton of great information, but I find people aren't using it as enough as they could in their lives. So we wanted to create a space where people could come to, and we could augment what we're doing on the podcast with even more insight, more motivation, more collaboration. So we just launched that. In addition to that, we are launching a speakers bureau, which is in the formation stage now, a podcast network, and then I have 2 books coming out, one later this year, one at the beginning of next year. The first one is a children's book, which is part of a 10-book series. The first one is called You Matter, Luma, and it's really the story for children and the adults who are reading it to them of the importance of mattering in a child's life, and for them to feel visible to those who are supporting them. And then my next novel that I just finished writing is called The Mattering Effect. And it's really a profound book that hopes to solve this condition of invisibility at a family level, at a relationship level, in the workplace, and at a societal level. So I am really excited to get that one out in the world too.
Awesome. Well, John, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a busy guy, and you got an ally over here at Born Primitive. So appreciate you.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be on the show. It's always an awesome time being on other podcasts.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely. We'll see you.